So this is going to be about the t-test, and this first video is sort of an introduction with the theory behind it, and the next ones will be practical, where I show how to do a t-test on the Casio calculator and also in Microsoft Excel. So we can start with what the t-test is for, and what we want to do in a t-test is we want to compare data samples. Two samples, and usually from the same populations. So that could, for example, be two samples of tulips, and very often there is a difference between the group that they are exposed to different environments, for example, that these samples of tulips get different amounts of sunlight. It could be two groups of students. For example, two groups of chemistry students that are given the same test, and the teacher wants to see if is there any difference between the groups. It could be a new fuel from an oil company, and they want to compare it to the old fuel to see if it's more efficient than the old one. So it's about comparing data samples, and what you are comparing is the mean between the two. Now, the mean between two samples is never going to be exactly the same, but the question here in a t-test would be, are they significantly different? Are they different enough to be considered different? Now, another important point is that a t-test can only be used, it only applies to normally distributed data. So that's an assumption we have to make when we do a t-test is, okay, the data we are looking at, it fits a normal probability distribution. Just as with a chi-square test, we set up hypotheses. So the null hypothesis is going to be that the two means are equal. And that means that, well, we can also write that like this. So x bar, this bar above it means mean. So the mean of x's in the one sample is equal to the mean of x's in the second sample. And by equal, we mean it's not so different that they are unequal. Yeah. So again, they're never going to be exactly the same. The alternative hypothesis is that the two means are not equal. And here we can distinguish between two types of tests. So we'll get back to this, but what we call a two-tailed test. The other one is called a one-tailed test. So for a two-tailed test, the alternative hypothesis is going to be the mean of the first sample is unequal to the mean of the second sample. Simple. In a one-tailed test, you either say that, okay, the mean of the first sample is greater than the mean of the second sample. Or you hypothesize that the mean of the first sample is smaller than the mean of the second sample. Now, when we do this test on the Casio, there's going to be a choice that we need to make. Pooled. What does that mean? You have to choose whether it's this is going to be a test for a pooled variance or not pooled. So pooled means that we assume that the two populations, or the two samples, rather, the two samples have equal variance. And that's more or less what we need to know before we get into the technical stuff. So t-tests are not very complicated, and you are required to know how to do this, both for psychology and biology.